Hello everyone and welcome to our live stream today. We're happy to have you with us. My guest today is Dr. Matt Edwards. Hello Matt, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks so much for taking time out of your life and busy schedule to spend this time with us. It's always a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Happy to be here.
So we talked a lot. For those of you who have been following us, and I'm sure you are, and you know what's going on, but just in case you haven't heard about it, we are starting the Big Five Coordinations of Singing, Tongue, and Vowel Coordination training this Friday, and that's going to be a 4-week program where we have 3 classes on Friday, 3 on Tuesday for the next 4 weeks. So it's going to be 24 classes dedicated to helping you increase your coordination control, your agility, flexibility of your tongue. And today we're going to talk about why you should care. When we're talking about tongue tensions, and I remember the first time as a singer, people were talking about tongue tensions. I was kind of, I don't know, I just got into singing. I learned how to sing. I just followed what people said, and it worked, and things were going well. I was by no means completely developed, but I was working, things were going well, and singers started talking about their tongue tension. I had no idea what they were talking about. I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. And I didn't even know that vowels, every vowel is just a shape of your tongue. All those things, when I learned them, were kind of mind blowing and opened my mind to, oh wow, look at all these possibilities of how I can improve what I'm doing to get a better sound, to find more comfort in my voice, to become more efficient. And I didn't know all these things were going on. So I think this is incredibly valuable information to share with singers everywhere. And that's why, as Matt and I talked, we decided to just talk about the impact that your tongue and tongue tensions can have on singing and vocalization, and also the reverse side, what happens when you get rid of these things. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The chat's open. If you have a question, pop it in the chat. We'll monitor that. We'll try and answer all of your questions. And even if if you're struggling with anything in your singing, you want to come on and volunteer, we're happy to give you some feedback and see what we can do to help you start relieving that tongue tension. Just know the next 4 weeks, this is what we're going to be doing, intensive classes over 4 weeks to really help you make some dramatic improvement in your singing fast. So, yeah, Matt, if I approached you as a singer on the street and said, hey, because we had time, we're walking our dogs, we just happened to meet, the dogs are playing, and they're like, oh, you're into singing too, cool. Well, tell me, how does the tongue and tongue tensions impact singing?
Yeah. So I think what a lot of people don't realize is how big the tongue is compared to the vocal tract. So, I love my anatomical models. I brought my head today. So this is our, mock-up head. But so for those of you watching, if you don't know, the vocal tract is the term we use to describe everything from the opening of the vocal folds, which is right here, all the way up to the opening of the lips, right? So it's this tube. And as you're looking at this tube, I'm running, my pencil up and down through this tube, you might notice this huge red blotch that's right here. That's the tongue. And, we see it from bottom to top, front to back, it's big, but then we forget that it's kind of hard to show it on the camera, but there you go. It has width to it as well. So this muscle, it's actually a group of muscles that all control the tongue, is huge. It takes up more than 50% of your vocal tract. And so, when you're singing, the tongue has so much impact on everything that you do. It's helping you form your vowels for sure, right? We have to get our tongue into specific positions in order to get different vowel qualities. You also need the tongue to be agile enough to produce your consonants. But then when you're trying to make resonance changes, well, we make resonance changes by changing the shape of the vocal tract, and one of the most movable parts of the vocal tract is the tongue. I mean, yeah, we can lift the soft palate, but the soft palate has some limitations, right? You can move it kind of up and maybe feel some width. It's kind of where it moves. Doesn't do a whole lot else with that. But your tongue can pull back, can pull forward, can arch up, can flatten down, can narrow in, right? So there's all these variations that you can do. We have our pharyngeal muscles, our constrictor muscles. They become a lot of problems for a lot of singers. They basically contract in and let go. That's it. So when you're trying to work on constriction, you're really trying to just let go of the the grabbing that you're feeling and getting those muscles to get out of the way. You're not trying to coordinate it to move in a bunch of different directions. But the tongue, you do want it to move in different directions. And that is, a skill that has to be learned, because in our everyday speech, our everyday talking, we're not thinking about, moving our tongue for resonance, or, most of the time we're not thinking about the quality of our vowels when we speak. We're just communicating with other people. And so that's why it seems so foreign to us when we come to sing, that we would have to put so much attention on our tongue.
Thank you. That's a really nice overview. So in vocal training, there are, both of us have explored a lot of different methodologies, and of course, come in contact with other teachers, singers, and there are a variety of approaches to the tongue position.
Yeah.
In classical singing, first time someone introduced me to what they call a compressed tongue. This is where the old Italian, the Italians experimented the best they could for hundreds of years, talking about, okay, what are you doing? How does this work? That's the old bel canto school of singing. And they figured out a lot of stuff. I mean, most of the things they figured out were spot on just through sensation and observation. So one of the techniques they had was they'd take a little teaspoon, put it on the front of the tongue, and push the back forward without letting the tongue go out of the mouth. And that gave kind of the tongue got squished kind of and I remember very distinctly one coach I was working with, he said, watch a baby when it screams, and the tongue looks like this. And he said, that's the tongue position you want in classical singing. Now, I tend to be someone that's not fixed in, I'm not going to try and do that position. I don't believe one absolute perfect position is going to work for everything. There are very subtle variances, but in classical singing, that is a technique to darken the sound. And it's very interesting that the tongue, like you said, really big. I like to just think of it as my hand. It's about as wide as my hand. It goes in the kind of that shape, not completely, but there's like the top we can feel, and there's this big part underneath that we're just not aware of until you start working with it in singing. But it does say, okay, if I'm move the back front a little bit and the front back, I'm doing two things. I'm getting the back out of, I'm creating more space back there and getting it high, and that's going to change the resonance or the sound, the timbre of my voice, and that's going to give me a big, rich, darker color. Now that is definitely not what I want. If I'm Sam Smith or Adam Lambert, I might go through that position, or I'm Celine Dion. That's just not a sound I want as part of my vocal identity. So we got different tongue techniques. There's a lot of the musical theater. You have a lot of musical theater students in your program, and congratulations, your program is cranking out a lot of people that work in the business. That's so exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And it's altogether different, right?
Yeah. But it also depends on the show. I mean, they're doing different things. Like I was just in New York. I got to see a couple of my students in different Broadway shows, and what you're looking at is happening in Titanic, where you're making parodies of Celine Dion music, and playing with that. You're doing a whole different, strategy all along the way than what is in Death Becomes Her, which is a little bit more of your traditional musical theater sound. And that's a whole lot different than what's happening in The Outsiders or what's happening in Hell's Kitchen, and Floyd Collins is about to come out. We got one of our students in that, who's kind of more of a pop singer, so it'll be interesting because Adam Gettle's music isn't necessarily, ultra poppy. And, but I know that he's working on a different, vocal quality for that show. So yeah, it's really movable. One of the things I think it's interesting to point out, though, too, that you mentioned with the classical singing and the different tongue positions, There's a great book called National Schools of Singing by Richard Miller. So Richard Miller was one of the most famous classical voice pedagogues, really active in the 80s and 90s as well. And he went around Europe and tried to figure out, well, what's different about the way that the Germans sing versus the Italians versus the French, right? So we had him already starting to go, what's a little bit different? There were some studies that were done in the 2000s, maybe the 20 teens as well, where scientists were trying to figure out why people from different racial and ethnic groups might have different vocal qualities. Now, I don't know if the ethics of the research were the world's best, I don't know. But what was interesting is they were trying to figure out how the width between the molars, the distance between the teeth and the back of the molars, and the distance between the molars and the roof of the mouth was affecting resonance, and they found some statistically significant differences. So we also have to kind of consider, as we're doing some of these tongue things, is that mouth shape might play a role in this as well, right? I've got a really narrow face, especially under this beard. And my tongue's a little bit big for my bottom teeth. It kind of always rests on the bottom. And so my experience with my tongue may be a lot different than somebody who's got a big, broad jaw. And so, that's the thing is we're, working with singers as we, especially in the classical world. I mean, I kind of loved Sam Raimi, and loved the way that man sang, or James Morris. These were these huge, famous opera singers at that time. But my head shape's different. And so, I would try to watch everything that they did, and I would try it out, try this tongue pulling back thing you mentioned, and it didn't work for me. And I believe that those are all valid techniques for the people who it works for, because it's clearly working for them, but it didn't work for me. And so I think that's the other thing that's like interesting about this, and why I like something like this Big 5 intensive, where we're spending 4 weeks and 24 classes going through all this information, is it's really starting to try to help people figure out what is their secret recipe. That there are lots of recipes out there. Like you said, you and I have both put a lot of time into investigating them all. And I think you and I both investigate them all because we realize different people have different needs. And our job as teachers is to help each one of our students find the tools that work for their specific needs.
Yeah, thank you. I experienced the same things. I had a coach that his favorite exercise was to open his mouth and go, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. And it doesn't work for me. He could get the most ringy E there. So I can get it a little closer, but I have to start on the A. And I have to think A. It just puts my tongue in a little different position. A, I, I, and what I noticed was, for me, it sounds in the bottom like A, but the higher I go, it sounds more like E. But he had a broader face, broader jaw, short neck, big rib cage, and he just cranked that E out in that resonance, and he practiced that for a long time. I practiced that a long time with him as well, but he never liked it when I was, for my feeling, doing an E in the bottom. He's like, no, it's not the same, and whenever I thought I was doing A, he's like, yeah, that's it. So sometimes it's really weird what we hear and observe on our inside, and it's not going to be exactly the same for every singer. I've had another coach who's a Grammy-winning bass, one of the most famous basses in his day, and he's like, this is what I do, this is what I did, and I'm world famous, so it works. And if you can't do it, you're not practicing hard enough. And that was just the wrong attitude altogether. Just, people becoming famous teachers that are great singers but have no idea about teaching and differences in anatomy. And why should they? This is what I did, I became famous, so it worked. That's their conclusion. And I agree, it works for people that need exactly that, but it doesn't work for people that are anatomically a little bit different. So that's what we want to explore in this online training intensive, is a variety of approaches to help you find what works best for you. Doesn't mean we can't, get out of our mold and stretch into some uncomfortable things we've never done before to try and increase that flexibility and range of motion. but we're not going to live in the extremes. We're going to live in the efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's the not living in the extremes, living in the efficient. I love that. I think it's a really great, great way of explaining this because I think that that's, you and I both do social media. We both post stuff, on TikTok, Instagram, and it's easiest if I want to think about something that I can toss out there in 90 seconds to give some sort of an extreme because I know it'll get people to at least explore something different to give them some new idea. It's easy to just throw out like a little quick, nugget of information that I know will help, but I also know it's a half truth. That, as you're posting it there, it's like, well, that is important, but you then need to eventually add this thing in there. Unless you're this kind of person, unless you're singing this kind of music. And that's, where it gets tricky on social media to really help people just through posts alone. And so I think that's important for singers who are considering doing an intensive like this, who are looking at other opportunities, is that those social media teachers and their information they're sharing is really great. But sometimes we all post these extremes, and it's not intended to be the only technique or the only approach to getting something done. It's meant to be a mind stimulating idea that might help you find something you didn't know existed before. But we all know that eventually you're going to have to get with somebody to help you put those pieces together.
Yeah, that is an important aspect. This is why part of a very important part of the Big Five online coordinations of singing intensive trainings is that you have the ability to interact with us. So when you come to the classes, you have the ability to interact with us. If you can't make every class, it's no big deal. They're recorded. You can watch the same content, and you can ask the question in my community, which you'll have access to when you participate. You can ask questions right in the course, and we can answer those questions. And when you're there live, you answer your questions. We work a lot with the singers, with the participants, on actually applying this. Let's work this exercise. Okay, that you're doing this right. Here's some things I hear that you can improve it. That this doesn't seem to work great for you. How about we try this variation? And then let's look at how using this is now helping you to improve your singing. So we can get really specific with that guidance. So it is important to have guidance. Nobody makes it on their own with no guidance. You can do a lot of the theoretical learning. You can get started practicing the exercises. At one point, you are going to figure out a lot on your own, but your journey is just going to go faster when you have some input on how you can improve your execution. And it's always amazing. It's happened to me as a singer where all of a sudden something clicks and I'm like, why didn't I not get this 2 years ago? It's so clear. It makes so much sense. But guess what? You can't see what you can't see. You have to get up in your perspective, broaden your perspective, have a different viewpoint, and train these coordinations individually so they can come together in a new way that you couldn't experience because you had not developed that control yet. We're going to keep going, but I'm just popping into the chat here. This is an exclusive coupon code for today. If you've attended the other live stream today, you know about that. But if you use this code, when you check out and sign up for the Big Five Intensive coming up Friday, you'll get a surprise bonus, and that could be one of those things. So everybody that signs up is today using that code. I know it's from today. You guys were actually here. Nobody else sees this code. We'll get you a nice little bonus there. So we'll keep going, of course, but want to hear back from you as well. You might have some questions already. You might be thinking, how does this apply? I've heard about this. Does that really work? So don't hold back if you have any questions going on. Could you give us a little bit of an insight about things you're going to go into more detail during this course in your classes coming up?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got these amazing videos that are, we captured in an MRI machine up at NYU Langone Medical Center. And so they're like X-ray videos of people's heads while they're singing, and you get to watch things move around. So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to take a look at those again. Looked at them in a couple of the other intensives, but we're going to be looking at it with a focus on the tongue and watching how the tongue moves, just to really try to build a really good mental map of what it is that you're working with. Then we're going to go through an exercise series that I find really helps people start to make sense of their tongue, right? It's a series that helps you, first of all, make sure that the tongue doesn't automatically just pull back on you. It does for a lot of singers. I have a theory on that. It's a really hard theory to test, but it makes sense to me, is that swallowing and singing have a lot in common. And so when we go to swallow, we're chewing our food. And one of the first actions of swallowing is our tongue starts to pull back as our soft palate lifts up. And when that happens, it triggers our vocal folds to close firmly together. Air pressure builds up beneath those vocal folds. And then as the larynx lifts because of the vocal fold pressure, the pressure that's underneath those folds, the tongue goes back further to guide food down into your esophagus so you can swallow. Well, let's think about singing. When we sing, we move our tongue up into a position for a vowel. Well, when we're about to swallow, we're starting to move our tongue up into the first position of swallowing. And usually when we're making that vowel transition to get that tongue up, we're also lifting our soft palate, because most of the time we don't want to sing nasal. First two steps of swallowing. If we're singing, we're pulling our vocal folds firmly together. For most things. If we're singing some real light, breathy stuff, not so much. But a lot of times we don't see a whole lot of tongue tension and breathy singing. It does show up, but not to the extent that we hear it in big voice singing. So once you go to, like, sing an operatic sound, or you're singing a belt sound, a rock sound, you got firm vocal fold closure. Well, anytime you got firm vocal fold closure, your air pressure is going to build up beneath those vocal folds. And anytime air pressure builds up beneath those vocal folds, it's going to put an upward pressure on the larynx, which again are steps of swallowing. So then you're trying to emit a sound, but I believe your body is trying to go to its swallow reflex. Because at that point, the only thing that's left is for your tongue just to take the food back. And so we'll hear people going up for a big high note going, ah! And they're getting stuck as they sing, and I think it's because their tongue is just trying to go into that automatic phase for swallowing. So one of the first things I want to do, and somebody just mentioned it, Janet mentions, we swallow a lot more than singing. We swallow hundreds to thousands of times a day. So your body is really in what we would call the automatic phase for how to go backwards. So anytime we're in a movement pattern in what's called the automatic phase, where our body just knows how to execute, doesn't require any cognitive processing, we have to try to break our body of that movement pattern and introduce a new option. So the first thing I do is try to introduce to my singers what the option is that doesn't have the tongue going back, but is phonating with the tongue moving forward. And we start to experiment with what that feels like. Try to make sure that the swallowing muscles are out of the way and we can just simply emit sound, release sound. And that takes some time, depending on the singer. But we just want to live in that zone for a little bit just to retrain our brain. So our brain realizes, oh, I have a swallowing function with firm vocal fold closure, and I have a released tongue version of making sound with vocal fold closure. Once the brain starts to understand that, then we can start doing other things with the tongue. And those other things are all coordinated movements. But the thing is that unless you are somebody who really does a lot of public speaking or does voiceover work, you're not using your full agility of your tongue in your everyday speech. Because most of us do not talk like this in our everyday speech. We are more talking to people a little bit more relaxed. Like when my kids come home, how's school today? Well, that's good. How's math? It's not how was math, right? Well, if you want to go try to sing some, let's say, like hip-hop, more influenced songs, where you want to really be trying to get that tongue moving really, really, really fast, then you're going to have the agility to do that. So I have a series of drills that I'm going to take you all through. I'm going to show you how to get the front of your tongue active and the back of your tongue active, and then start getting your body used to bouncing between front and back. Because the more that you start developing that agility, you start to give your brain all these different options that are available to it. Then we try to go back to singing and see what has just taken care of itself, because a lot of times things just magically resolve once you're doing these agility exercises. And then if they don't, we can start to do some fine-tuning of stuff like vowels. Right? There's some exercises where we can isolate our internal hearing and really move our tongue around until we hear the vowel quality that we're looking for, find that quality, and then listen to the external sound and see if that is the quality we want. And then we can play between internal and external and finish fine tuning that, especially if you're trying to do some really a certain kind of resonant vowel quality for a classical singing or a musical theater, but even some rock songs. Like if you're trying to sing, some Queen, you want that Freddie Mercury sound, you need to have that really ringy vocal quality, or maybe an Adele song where you're really trying to get a ringing quality, or Whitney Houston. So, you can use these same strategies in those styles as well. And so we're going to spend a lot of time on my portion just thinking about what those exercises are, and then getting people to sing and starting to show how you can translate all of those ideas over into your songs. And then if things just are still not working with those, there are some things that we can do with the base of your tongue by really getting our fingers underneath and feeling those bottom muscles, where we can get them to let go as well. And it's a whole exercise series that requires a lot of concentration and relaxation, because once again, you're reprogramming your brain. But I find that once you reprogram your brain in that way, it releases all kinds of tension, including laryngeal tension. Because you got to remember that, like, as we're looking here, your tongue attaches to your chin on the front, but it also attaches to your hyoid bone on the back. And your hyoid bone is the bone that suspends your larynx inside of your neck. So anytime that this is contracting, it's pulling your larynx up. And if it's pulling your larynx up, your body's probably going to start compensating with other laryngeal elevators. There's 7 of them. And those muscles start getting engaged. Now you're going to start feeling tightness in your throat. And once your larynx starts getting up too high, then it's going to have a hard time tilting. And then when it's having a hard time tilting, you're going to be flat. And you're not going to get the high notes that you want. So for a lot of singers, getting underneath that chin and really figuring out what to do with those muscles ends up being a big breakthrough. And it was for me, it was huge. Once I learned that, I'll never forget the house I was in when I learned how to do that. And I was like, oh my God, that? And I had to let it go, right? And so, it was a huge, huge breakthrough for me. And I have further studied it and found better understanding of it, and continue to share it with students to this day, and find so many of them find finally freedom and release when they, start to use these exercises.
Yeah, well, I'm excited already just listening to you talk about it, even though that we've already talked about it. I'm like, I can't wait. This is going to be so good.
Dude,
it's exciting.
I love talking about the tongue because, there's so many. Yeah, I'm lucky because of the institution I teach at, the summer program I run. I do workshops, around the world, and I get to work with singers, many, many, many singers every year. And I would say it's probably at least 75% of the time that they're telling me of the issues that they have, and we start listening, and we're like, yeah, it's your tongue. It's oftentimes, some of them are more advanced singers. It's a real small little thing, and you just make this small little adjustment, but it feels huge. And then for my, singers who are new to some of these things, we, make big adjustments, and it's really huge. But yeah, it is exciting because the tongue work really does become a game changer for a lot of people.
Man, it is a game changer. I'm pretty. I'll be honest. I'm very surprised how little a lot of the mainstream methodologies work with optimizing consonants.
Yeah.
With the tongue. Consonants are all created by the tongue, and good singers sing through the consonants in very skillful ways. Consonants are disruptive factors. They disrupt the airflow. That's how they make a sound. You gotta t, p, k, d, g, m. But they can get very disruptive because that's what they're doing. They're interrupting the airflow. They're channeling it. They're making clicks. They're making soft sounds with the voice. Sometimes the voice has to stop completely to make those sounds. And almost all of the consonants are made with the tongue, and the same with the vowels. So that's something I'm going to be working with you on, is how to actually make resonant consonants without triggering tension, and going through similar exercises, and also just looking at how the tongue obstructs your airflow. It's supposed to, but if it's doing it in a way that you're not aware of, you might not even be aware of why things aren't working. And it can be so subtle. I like to think of the tongue as like the rebel in the classroom. It's going to be the one student in the classroom that's not paying attention, looking out the window, or just starting to fall asleep on their desk. It's just like sometimes it just wants to take off and do its own thing. And you've got to learn to manage it. Otherwise, it rebels. It will rebel on you. It's just going to tighten up. It's going to randomly do something. You're like, what are you doing? Calm down. So it does take reprogramming. I like to say singing, the way you sing today is your singing habit, because singing is thought controlled. You're sending signals to muscles that are moving a lot of things, around 100 muscles at the same time. So it's way too complex to consciously manage. You've got to rewire those connections in your brain, those signals, and train things not to be reactive, be responsive, but not reactive, like Matt pointed out. If you stick your tongue out, just go ahead and stick your tongue out, it's going to pull. It's going to pull on that hyoid bone. It's going to pull on the muscles on the inside, all the way up to your jaw. It's going to pull on your palate even. It's going to pull here. So you think, oh, that's what's going on. That's what's messing up my voice. So if you go, ah, while you're singing, that's a huge disruption in the air pressure balance, and your vocal folds are reactive. So they're going to immediately go, ah, and do some weird sound. Now, if you train that movement and you train the flexibility and agility into those muscles, they won't react and pop up with every movement of the tongue. You'll gain some separation of movement, some individual independence or more independence, and have a less disruptive impact. So we'll work on that. We're going to work on targeted exercises, and you'll find that there's going to be a bit of crossover, and I like crossover. We just did the Big Five 2.0 was all on pharyngeal resonance. Well, you can't tune your resonance without addressing your tongue. So we've already talked about parts of the tongue and vowels. We're just going to keep working on that and move into these agility factors. And there's some very, very fun techniques. It's really all about figuring out how do I get my tongue to do what I want it to do instead of being the victim of reactive mechanisms, which we all are. It doesn't matter how good you get. You have to be on the lookout, because that it's going to want to do things. It wants to help. I think sometimes you get frustrated with your voice. I try and view it as I've got a lot of parts in there that want to help. So just like me, I'm going to do it. Let me get involved. I'm going to solve that problem. And then things get in the way. So when you just say, okay, just calm down. Thanks. It's not your turn yet, but you get a turn in a minute. Then you can you achieve so much more relaxation in your singing. Or let's say your singing will become more comfortable. Everything will become more efficient. It will become vastly more easy than you've ever experienced. It's going to be less effort. As soon as you fix your tongue, your vocal fold adduction muscles don't have to compress as hard. Your pharyngeal constrictor muscles don't have to squeeze as hard. You will be able to reduce the amount of air pressure you're putting in. So everything gets better immediately. And over time, that efficiency just creeps in more and more and more. For maybe some of you that haven't seen this, I discovered this on an anatomy site. Some of you have already seen this, but it is just a brilliant thing to look at, to see the tongue. What does the tongue look like? So let's have another look. It's loading. Visible body.
Great.
It's really, really cool. I gotta pop this down. I love seeing this. It is just so cool. It really gives you a visual of how your tongue is just suspended in your mouth and attached to everything that's making your sound. And these are the muscles that we need to get to increase softness, flexibility, agility, so that when the tongue goes up, it doesn't pull every single one of these muscles with it. That's the danger for the singer, that I'm moving my tongue to hit a vowel position. Now inadvertently I'm pulling up the larynx at the same time, and I'm mispositioning the larynx, and my jaw up here is also giving resistance. So all of these muscles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 muscles that the tongue's attached to, are now becoming tight. And if they become tight, I'm going to restrict movement. So if they need to stretch, think of them like bungee cords. Yeah, little bungee cords, like a little kid jumping on a trampoline that's, strapped into a belt with bungee cords. It's just stretchy. The more stretchy they are, the more that you can fly and do tricks on the trampoline, and it's so much fun. So if your tongue can get that same quality, you're going to achieve speed, precision, agility, flexibility, and all of that's going to allow you to make those minimal adjustments that really improve your sound quality. Let's see. We have a question in there.
Yeah, I see. Oh, yeah, I do see it. Yeah. So this comes from Jack. He said, you mentioned tilt and potentially going flat. Would you mind sharing your thoughts regarding tilt? All ways to feel this tilt coordination, and how a cry pharyngeal posture plays a role in singing primarily contemporary and achieving optimal or a most pleasing, albeit subjective sound. Okay, so do I have my larynx model down here? I think you caught me on a day I don't have the larynx. I think I left it up at the university. But so the larynx sits on what's called the cricoid cartilage. And it has bottom horns, we call them the inferior horns of the thyroid cartilage. And then there's a muscle, it's called the cricothyroid muscle. And when that cricothyroid muscle tilts, it pulls that thyroid cartilage like this. So then the larynx is literally tilting. And when it tilts, the vocal folds are locked basically to the back of the cricoid cartilage, and then they're connected to the thyroid cartilage, and so they're elongating those vocal folds. So the model helps a lot. I wish I had it here. I'm sorry about that. But so there's this tilting action that happens. And that tilting action has to happen, otherwise you won't get high notes. You can blow a ton of air pressure out of it, but then you're just screaming. And, you're going to be sharp and it's not going to be good. When that tilts, you feel it sometimes against the base of your tongue because of that hyoid bone connection, right? The tongue is connected to the hyoid bone, so you sometimes will feel your larynx moving up into the base of your tongue. Now, if you're shoving that tongue down and you're tightening it up, that can end up, causing you problems. And again, then you're locked and you can't make sound. There is one particular method that talks about cricoid tilt and the cricoid cartilage tilt. And they have their reasons they believe that happens, and there were some early studies done that made them think that's what they were seeing. The overwhelming scientific evidence points to the cricoid cartilage not actually tilting. Every once in a while, there'll be a study where they're like, maybe it does, and then there's others that are like, no, it doesn't. I'll tell you this, when I'm in there on a cadaver, because I've dissected many larynxes, and I've held at least a dozen of them in my hand, there is nothing that I've ever seen on a larynx in my hand that makes me think that cricoid cartilage has some active tilting capability that we're somehow missing. Now, I think everybody's anatomy is different, and one of the things that we probably don't fully understand that might play a role here is hypermobility. There's something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, for instance. And Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder that makes some people more bendable than other people. So it's possible that we didn't know in those old studies where we thought that the cricoid cartilage was tilting, that person maybe had some sort of a hypermobility issue, where maybe their cricoid cartilage is tilting different than anybody else's does because of that issue, and we just don't fully understand that yet, and there'll be more to learn, right? So I'm always open-minded, right? But to me, it's not really the tilt of the cricoid cartilage, it's more the tilt of the thyroid cartilage that we're being aware of. Now, once you start making tilting movements and things like that, you're going to a lot of times see a narrowing happening in the vocal tract. And when you see that narrowing, you not only in the vocal tract itself, but we have something called the aryepiglottic sphincter. And so basically the tongue attaches to the epiglottis. So you can see it here. So here's the epiglottis. It's this little flap. And when our tongue pulls back to swallow, that flap closes off our vocal folds so the food goes down into our esophagus and not into our lungs. And there's tissue on the side of it. Does that? Let me see. I think I have one larynx here I can show to you. So yeah, so on this larynx, you can see that there's like this tissue that's right here. And in most of the strobes I see, people have slightly different shapes of this. And this impacts resonance. And so if that larynx is going up and the tongue pulls back a little bit, you narrow that little part of the tube, the epilarynx. And when you narrow the tube, that has resonance implications. Now there's other crevices in there that people are currently researching that they think may have more of an implication. But to me, at the end of the day, something's moving in that space, whatever we want to call it, because we can't control whether it is, the sinuses that are in there, or if it's the area epiglottic folds. We don't have control over that, direct control of it.
Philippe, can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I come on or no?
Yeah, fine, yeah.
So, hello. So I understand what you're saying with the narrowing. So I'm looking at it kind of from a different perspective. In terms of like a cry posture, as opposed to a tilt, when you're getting more of like when they talk about open throat-ish, but more of a widening, like when you think about crying, you almost like a child crying. Philippe, we talked about this the other day. There's more of that space and it's the opposite of a squeeze.
Yeah.
So is there a way to create that posture, or is it just to like kind of think about crying, feel a little bit of the cry posture, and then sing or do exercises and whatnot, and then over time perhaps muscle memory will take over? Obviously the cry posture is only good for what you want to use it for. I personally want to try to get a little bit more into that, my overall kind of sound. So
are you talking more of a why? Give me the sound that you're talking about, like what?
Well, it's not really a specific sound. It's more of just like it's almost like a way to, I don't want to say to not squeeze, and I'm not talking about like a country or a twang, or a buzz, but just to get a little bit more of that cry type of feeling, but without the emotion of the cry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think, so this is where it's always interesting and fun as we talk about this stuff, because I have a friend who talks about cry in some of their presentations and stuff, and they talk about almost more of a narrowing in the way that they describe it. But I know what you're talking about as well.
Right.
So, but to me, what I think is happening there is we're getting a widening of the back of the tongue. So there's muscles inside of the tongue themselves that constrict, or they contract. And so when you're trying to get that feeling that you're talking about, it's getting those muscles to let go. Well, if those muscles let go, that's going to have a ricochet effect down into the back of your vocal tract. So we should start to see that epiglottis area starting to widen and release, and then all of these pharyngeal constrictors letting go as well. And then your larynx has more freedom to move if it wants to. So, what you're asking is like, is that a muscle memory thing? Everything that we do is a muscle memory thing. Everything that we do is about re-coordinating the brain.
Is it also, do you think it's helpful at all to either practice scales or any type of practice really for that matter, or do your songs in somewhat of a, let's say, a gentle cry posture? It's not like a blanket comment. I just mean, is that something that I've heard that's kind of, can be helpful for certain people? And so I've started doing it a little bit. I just want to know your thoughts on that cry posture and if you think that can be beneficial.
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's very few things I think aren't beneficial to learn about your voice and explore, right? That's why I'm not anti any method or technique, even when I'm like, science, like there's an idea that there's a zipper in the vocal folds. There's not, but that helps some people mix. So when it's helping them mix, put a zipper in your vocal folds. Don't care, like if it's working for you, But I think what you're talking about with the cry is, it's starting to open things up in your pharynx and giving you access to different vocal qualities that do belong in lots of styles of singing. And what we know about the cognitive part of singing is that you do have to build muscle memory, is what we call it. It's building new neurological connections. And so, doing vocal exercises in that quality, if that sound is helping you, you like that sound, and it fits your style of music, that's a smart strategy, because you're starting to fine-tune your brain to just make those sounds without overthinking. And with
that's awesome.
Everything we do in singing, we want to take our brain to the spot where we don't.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Matt. The last little bit is just creating frequency with the space in your mouth and through the various tracks. Is there a way to, obviously a coach is the best way to get that feedback. You can record yourself and listen back. And is there a quality to listen to for, I don't want to get too into formants and whatnot, but just resonance and frequency to hear in yourself? Again, it's subjective, but what would be an optimal pleasing sound? If we were all in a room, some people might say, oh, I don't like how that guy sounds, or I like how she sounds, or whatnot. But there sometimes can be an overall, like, yeah, that guy's good. And we can all look around the room and be like, that guy's good. Or we can all say, yeah, she's not so good, or he's not too good. Is there an optimal kind of way to listen, to hear for those frequencies or that pitch that's like, ooh, wow. Like if you were listening to me or to Philippe or anyone else and say that right there, whatever you're doing right there, that's like your, I don't say tessitura, but you're, like a nice sweet spot. For any way to listen for that?
Well, no. So in essence, let me tell you, I'll go ahead, Philippe, but let me just say this, like, Pavarotti, right? Pavarotti, well considered like the world's greatest, operatic tenor of his time. And then you have Domingo. Well, Domingo's resonance strategy fits the ideal. Pavarotti's is not. Who sold more? Pavarotti. Right? So I do think there's more conversation in this than just the no. But I mean, I think that, like we could talk about this for the next hour. And that I do think, to me, I would say, and I want to hear what Philippe says on this, because I think this is a multi-person conversation. I think that when you get your vowel formants right, and we actually hear a very clear E vowel, I think we would universally say, yeah, that sounds like an E, and that would excite all of us. And then I think that if there's a ring to the voice, which we do have some frequency guidance on that when those frequencies are or are not present. And we know that a lot of people throughout research respond positively to that. I would say, so if you get your vowel formants right and you have some of this ring characteristic for the style that you're singing, you are more likely to get a large group of people to agree that that's a good sound.
Yeah, these are really great questions, and appreciate the questions, Jack. Just wanted to say, first of all, with the listen, kind of response to your question, ultimately everybody has their own personal taste. So let's just accept that as a fact. Not everybody's going to agree. I love Placido Domingo's sound. It's just gorgeous, right? I really enjoy Pavarotti as well. And I enjoy lots of different singers in different genres. They all have different strategies. So if we go back to your cry, there's the which is a more narrow setting, and then there's a more of a sobby cry. And that's a very different shape and tone. So when you experiment with both of those, look at what you feel. Just observe the sound you hear and what you feel, and try and apply a little bit of that in your singing, and then maybe try the other direction. And what you're ultimately going to find is version A is helpful, but not all the time. And then version B actually solves the problem that you're getting stuck with when you're just doing version A, and vice versa. So you're going to develop more awareness and control. And I do tell I agree with Matt, balance, this is just humanity. If we look at what is beautiful or attractive, you think of that a lot. Like my wife and I will agree and disagree on an attractive man and an attractive woman. We'll agree and disagree because one, we have different tastes, but all the studies on that is it's harmony. It's harmony and balance. That for some reason we find very attractive. So when the lack of tension in singing is generally preferred. It just, if you have a balanced resonance, meaning you're going to find your balanced resonance by first eliminating everything that's in the way of your resonance. So your voice sounds free and easy. People love that sound. And then if you look at all the singers you like, none of them appear to be straining. So the more efficient your voice gets, the more beautiful it becomes. And I do believe, I say this often to my clients, especially in the beginning, I said, I've never heard an ugly voice. I think the human voice in our ears is innately beautiful, but I've heard a lot of voices struggling to be free.
Yeah.
And when they're free, it's like this amazing beauty comes into the voice that I just often wonder, like, where did that come from? So, and it's not singer independent. It's singer dependent. Every singer that I work with that starts achieving this freedom and just free phonation and their everything starts aligning, all of a sudden the voice becomes extremely beautiful and attractive. So, and don't me, I think of that word, it's attracting. Why? Because it's communicating to me in a different way. It's vibrating me differently. And then you have the emotional layers in there, maybe pain, maybe a sob, or expression. That's communicating now. So everybody likes clear communication. And with singing, it's just, for me, that's it. The more free your voice gets, the more beautiful it gets. But we have to figure in taste in there, and sometimes we do constrict the airway in a way to make a particular resonance or a sound. That doesn't mean that it's over constricted. It's just the tongue is moved slightly to create a different resonance, but it's not straining. It's simply coloring. So when we get out of strain into coloring, then we become artists. And then your voice, it doesn't matter. I promise you, every single person in this live stream right now, all 24 of you, your voice is most beautiful when it's void of tension. It's just extremely gorgeous. And I believe that. I've never heard an ugly voice. I've heard a lot of voices trying to get free, including my own, right? But when it's free, people like it. When it's easy, people like it. Nobody here wants to hear somebody working hard. They just want to, everybody looks at singers and go, how do they do that? It doesn't look like they're working hard at all. Where's the sound coming from? I've had people say that to me many times. So you just look like this, you have this big voice. Where's that sound coming from? Well, I don't have a big voice. I just have learned to get it free and let it resonate more. I know people have much bigger voices, and maybe you would think, oh, I love Matt's sound. I just want to sing like Matt. And maybe some of you are like, I love Philippe's sound. I want to sing like Philippe. But if you pick two artists, any genres that you really think are great singers, Adam Lambert and Brandon Urie are completely different singers, but everybody loves their voices. Right? They're like, not everybody likes Sam Smith's voice, but you've got to admire his sound, and what he's able to do is very skillful. So it does depend a bit on taste, but great singing is just that. It just looks like the singers, they were just born and they could do that. But nobody was just born and could do that. They had to achieve it through a lot of hard work.
I was going to say the other thing I find interesting too, there's some studies that I'm always fascinated by about why people like music in the first place, or what attracts them to different things. And there's some studies with teenagers that are really interesting. The teens find their peer group through music, and they do have pastime music, but they also find emotional release through music. And what's interesting is that we know until early 20s, 23, 24, the brain of human beings is more emotionally driven than it is logically driven. And a lot of angst lives in people in that age group. And so when you listen to the newest pop stars, you will hear a lot of in the sound that isn't the freedom that we would hear in a Freddie Mercury. But when I work with the teenagers that I do, they're young adults, a lot of them, I'm 21, 22, they're still full of angst. They're still full of about everything. And I think that they hear some of that tension in some of these sounds, like that Ariana Grande sometimes has a little bit of in some of her breakup songs. And that really appeals to that age group because they feel all their emotions in their throat. And they feel so much inside of them trying to deal with life that we sometimes see young people gravitating towards things that those of us who are, more experienced, more well-weathered, don't necessarily feel. We don't want to walk through our lives anymore feeling like, ugh. So when we hear that open, that is what excites us. So I also think it's interesting that we hear some of these young singers who have success doing things that we would be like, yeah, I like that, that's tight. But I think it resonates with young people because it is tight, because they feel tight inside. So I don't know, it's a fascinating thing to consider as we evaluate why people sing differently and why people are attracted to different things.
Yeah, I love that. Cindy said if you could turn up your mic, it would be helpful for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Turn that up, no problem. Jack asked, so do they hear tension as balanced and pleasing? No, I don't think that they hear it as that. I think they hear it as emotionally connected to the breakup they just had.
Yeah, I was going to say this is why a lot of younger people and a lot of people that of various ages just really like heavy metal and underground strong vocal effects because it sounds so emotional, and arguably when you listen to it, it gets in you. Yeah, I mean, not everybody. Some people really don't like it, but I can appreciate it. It's just that release of energy and power and something raw, right?
Yeah.
So that's very fascinating as well. But the cool thing about that, when you work with people on distortions and how to do that, you'll discover that it's not it's not, you have to actually be quite gentle and relaxed to get that roughness going to be able to sustain it. It's in its how it's created is very different than how it's felt. And I think that's a really important rule for singing of all styles. The intensity is not coming from more and more and more work. It's coming from less and less and less constriction and more and more efficiency. The more efficient you get at singing, the louder you'll get, the more acoustic energy you'll get. The more easy that distortion to actually affect is, it sounds more violent. It sounds more guttural, and it's much less pressure and effort than it seems like. So that's why singers, whether it's in any genre, tend to be overdoing things in the beginning stages. And I think it's okay. You got to overdo to find it. And as soon as we find it, I just immediately say to the singer, "Great, you did it. You found it. Wonderful. Now find it with less effort."
Yep.
And just immediately start to reduce the effort you're putting in, and you'll discover, oh, wow, I've been overworking for years, right? And it's an interesting evolution. So, yeah, the great questions. We'd love to talk about this. We're going to wrap up today's class. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I really want to encourage you to join us. Join the Big Five Tongue and Vowel Intensive training. You won't regret it. You're going to love it. I'm going to just ask a couple of people that I know that have done a Big Five training here, like Mr. Irving over there. Jay, can you just share with the group what your experience has been participating in the Big Five online trainings, and why singers should get involved doing this? How has it helped you personally?
I think that it's kind of unique in terms of you're identifying specific coordinations in your singing, and you can really focus on one specific part. And I think that that's really valuable when you sort of add all of that work back into the mix, of your singing in general. You get, as you were talking about earlier on, you get by proxy, like Matt was talking about, things to start resolve or have resolved because you kind of went in a specific area and you had a sort of specific focus. And also for me, it's a great resource to have if you get access, the deals that you get with the lifetime access. You can actually keep on dipping into that and keep on referring back to it if you're getting confused about something, or maybe you didn't go deep enough into a specific area. You can keep on going back and keep on reprogramming things. I think it's really valuable, and I think it's quite unique. It's also well presented, and all the Philippe sort of presents it fantastically, and the teachers are all well picked. So I think it's great. I think it's a great thing to invest in for your singing.
Well,
There's
thank you,
my
Jay. Appreciate it, and then let me put you on the spot there, and just ask away. I don't know.
One thing
Go ahead, Matt.
I'd say, just one thing though to add to for anybody who is thinking about this, is that the knowledge and understanding the coordinations in the short term can, for some singers, be like, oh my God, this is so much. And that's normal in any skill acquisition. I mean, I'm trying to teach my son to, hit a baseball, and it's like, well, you got to hold the bat this way, then you got to swing it this way. I mean, it's like, it's a lot. And then eventually, once you know all of it, you just swing the ball bat and hit the ball, and it's just done. You no longer think about all those things. any athletic activity that you ever learned in your life, you had to think a lot about every little teeny moving part. Like bowling, I'm trying to teach my kids to bowl too. I'm trying to get them not to, throw the ball across the lanes and stuff. And it's like, I got to get them to hold the ball, to walk the ball, to throw the ball, not to drop the ball. It's like all this stuff. And at first they're just like, I can't do this. Well, I had them there at the bowling alley a couple weeks ago, and they bowled their best games ever. And instead of being on the verge of tears at the end of the game, they were so excited and they wanted to do it again. So I think that you just want to remember it with any activity, it can feel overwhelming when you're like, oh, there's all these things to think about. But eventually, as you keep immersing yourself, which is what like a 4-week intensive helps you do, all of a sudden the information starts to eventually just kind of settle and you go, oh, that's so freeing. Oh, it's that easy, right? So, it can feel overwhelming when people throw all this out, but I promise you, eventually, as it all settles in, you are going to feel so free compared to when you had all these questions and no answers.
Absolutely. It's repetition. We're trained to think of things in learning as linear. I don't like that because that's not how it works. It's circular. Think of like you're on the outer ring. You're picking up all this information, you're making this big arc, and then next step, once you've completed that cycle, you jump into the next inner ring, and now you're moving faster, and then you'll jump into the next ring, and your progress will accelerate. It's very circular how you learn to sing, because it is immersive and it's individual, and we wake up to a different body chemistry almost every day depending on how much we slept, how much we ate, how we feel. We got to deal with it. So it's circular. Your progress will accelerate. You need to go back and review what you learned, just because unfortunately everything you heard today, you're going to forget 90% of it within the next half hour, and that is just science. And don't feel bad, everybody's the same. But if you go back and review it, it's amazing. All of a sudden you jump to like 65% retention. You review it a third time, now you're in the 30s. And then you review it a fourth time, you retain like 90%. So it's amazing. You have to repeat it, and that's what I mean by the circular learning. Just keep jumping those rings. You will accelerate faster and faster, and that's when it starts getting fun. And it's not fun in the beginning because you're trying so hard and you said, Matt said if I do this, it's going to happen. And I'm doing it. I remember having breakdowns in my coaching sessions. I've told many of you that. And just yelling at my teacher. I wasn't trying to be mean. I was just frustrated. And they just say, I'm sorry, go home and listen to the lesson and we'll move on now. So I wasn't always the easiest student, but I was very passionate. And then when it clicked, I'm like, oh, go home and I listen to that lesson and I think about it again and again and again. And then suddenly I could hear it. I'm like, oh, okay. And when I could hear it, then I had to figure out what I felt that made the difference. What was I doing? And it doesn't happen immediately. Some things happen fast. Other things happen over time. So just remember that you are on your singing journey. We'd be happy to guide you at this phase of your development to make some accelerated progress, and we know that what we're going to share is going to continue to benefit you for years to come. So thanks so much for joining us today, everybody that has attended. I think you have, I'm not sure if everybody can see that post that I did in there. Let me see if I can get that back and post this one more time for all of you. Because if you join late, you might not be able to see it in the chat. So here it is. It's just in the coupon code for people here in this live stream. Save money, get an extra bonus, join us. We want you there. We want to help you. Thanks for your time. Let's all also give Matt a nice round of virtual applause for his time and being with us. I always clap silently like I'm in virtual applause.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to come and just hang out and chat with you.
It's a pleasure. We're going to start off on Friday, so join us and we'll be in touch. Don't forget to like, follow, stay in touch with us on social media. If you can't participate in the live classes and say, I'm just not going to be able to do it, just get the webinar version. It's going to be great. And if you can participate in some or half or as many as you can, get the full version. It's worth it. You get to work with some brilliant teachers. Have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll talk soon. And thanks for joining us. I'm going to just ask Matt to stay on the call with me for a few more minutes. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.